Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. From the streets of New York to around the world, the Mamdani effect is taking shape. Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani won the city's mayoralty earlier this month, sparking a new era with an election turnout higher than any race in the last 50 years. But this isn't just an American story. The energy around this movement, its bold ideas on justice, economics and climate change is resonating with Gen Z far beyond the US. So what exactly is the Mamdani effect? And what does it tell us about the future of politics? Today on The Front Page, Victoria University of Wellington senior lecturer Dr Mona Kewel is with us to discuss how this kind of politics could redefine the power and purpose of the next generation of leaders. So, Mona, when people talk about the Mamdani effect, what do you reckon that actually means?
Yeah, so overall, I would say it's mostly like a buzzword that has made the rounds in the context of the election when Mamdani was elected mayor of New York. So it's actually more a term that like journalists have coined to describe the excitement around the Mamdani election. Then it's actually a phenomena or an academic term. So he's a member of the Democratic Party. He's identifying as a socialist. He's young and he is Muslim. And so this is the opposite of the reactionary Republican Trump politician type that the US has recently mostly seen. So he's also the opposite of the moderate oldies that the Democratic Party has presented in the last decade, such as Joe Biden. So that someone like him could still get elected was actually a symbol, I would say, of hope for all those who are more progressive in the country. And so it got coined as the Mamdani effect because it showed that politics or the politics that he stands for, that those are still successfully drawing voters. And so more than it being an actual effect, it tells you something also about the journalists in the US who came up with that term and their hopes for the country and for themselves, because the media is under a lot of pressure in the USA from the Trump administration at the moment. And the freedom of press and independent media coverage is actually at stake. So for journalists, they had high hopes for him. And so I think this was one of the reasons why they so quickly came up with that term, the Mamdani effect. And they hoped it would be kind of a trend. And of course, it's very catchy. So the Mamdani effect as a headline gets you more clicks than 34-year-old socialist and Muslim elected mayor of New York. So the fact that he was an unlikely candidate with unlikely politics and then that he can get elected already has a lot of like news value per se. But when it coincides with the fact and the hope of many journalists who are also more on the left side, leaving Vox News aside, then basically a media hype is born. And of course, that quickly gets named. So in other words, I would say the Mamdani effect tells you at least as much about journalists in the US who are currently under pressure as it tells you about voters' preferences.
And what kind of issues did he run on that were seen so out of left field?
Yeah, so I think his branding was kind of different from what we currently see in US politics. So he's the opposite of the reactionary Trump politics of this administration and the Republicans. So for many, that actually makes him like a hero who kind of can turn the Handmaid's Tale story around. And so his platform centers a lot around equity and affordability, and that includes things like rent control or raising the minimum age. So literally opposite of what the Trump administration stands for. And so it's also the opposite of the so-called, he's also, I think, the opposite of the so-called Washington elite. And he effectively uses this in a sense that surely makes him a little bit more left-wing populist. And left-wing populism is more known for redistributional politics. And so that stands out in the USA at the moment because it's different from the right-wing populism that they have seen in recent years.
I quite liked this line from a New Yorker piece that I read. It's written by a journalist there named Eric Locke. I'll read it out to you. Mamdani offered his supporters an unsullied message of hope. He emphasised the similarities between Trump, Cuomo and Adams, all figures forward in the New York political scene of the past century, trapped in a psychodrama where 1983 never ended. And I think that expression gives a really good us versus them mentality. And like you said, that kind of Washington elite per se, and especially in New York as well. You can imagine 1983. You've got Trump Tower, you've got golden toilets, you've got Wall Street. And it gives you those kind of a real picture of what he was kind of fighting against, and people resonated with that, really, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think this very well captures like the left-wing populism he stands for, setting himself aside from this elite, and that's actually what populism is about. So the dichotomy of us, the people, against the elite, and he even like included like other candidates like in that. And yeah, you have I think very well described how he is different from those elites and the Golden Trump Tower. So I did live in upstate New York for a long time, and spent all of my weekends in New York, so I can relate to what you are describing, or what the line in that article has been describing. And I mean, like, it really resonated with people, and probably particularly also with like Gen Z voters who stand like for it's a different generation, different from previous generation in many like important ways. So they are more racially and ethnically diverse than any previous generation. So I think they're even like projected in by 2026 to become a majority non-white generation. And so basically they are also on track to be the most well-educated generation ever. And so highly educated people and also very much support redistributional politics more than people with like a lower education. And of course, this has like better chances to resonate with people and that generation than it has like probably had with previous generations. And New Yorkers are also known as much more progressive than the rest of the country. So I think it is still an open question if this would have been flying with the rest of the country or nationwide. I know some people were quick to say this is a nationwide movement, but I think urban voters are in general more progressive than rural voters, and New York are also known to be very progressive. And given that it's a very polarized country, I have some doubts that he could have gotten elected elsewhere in the US. And we are also still talking about the same country who in 2016 and 2024 was not ready yet to elect a female president. So one progressive mayor does not fully turn that around overnight, and the electorate is also not made up of Gen Zs and urban population alone. But surely his platform of equity and affordability resonated a lot with urban voters, progressive voters, and in particular, I think Gen Zs.
Together, we will usher in a generation of change. And if we embrace this brave new course, rather than fleeing from it, we can respond to oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves. After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
I suppose that Generation Z or Gen Z are often described as values-driven and impatient for that systemic change. How might Mamdani's leadership and this display of this kind of Mamdani effect, I suppose, resonate with, or I suppose even reshape their expectations of political leaders?
Yeah. So, as I said, we do know they have higher education. So we have the highest, I think, level of like college educated voters ever in the Gen Z generation. And so that means more support for redistributional politics. It also means, so a lot of surveys have found about Gen Zs in the US that they are more pro government. So that means they do not have this typical like help yourself attitude that has been embraced in the US for a long time. And so even Gen Z Republicans differ from older Republicans in their attitudes. They are, for example, much more acknowledging racial inequalities. They are also less likely than older generations to see the USA as superior over other countries. And so in this sense, I think Mamdani's politics surely have resonated with them. They are also digital natives. And so if you think of a generation that has no, or just probably the earlier ones, little memory of an era before the smartphone, and so they can very well approach through social media, which was a cornerstone of his campaign. So whenever so I think when asked about political issues, they do not differ that much from millennials. So I wouldn't expect a huge revolution with all of them becoming eligible to vote. But surely a candidate like Mamdani has like a much better chance to resonate with them than like older candidates like Joe Biden, for example.
Could his style of politics become a template for young politicians globally, do you think? And I'm thinking of New Zealand election next year as well.
Yeah, so I actually do think it could in particular be a template for social democratic and labor parties around the world. I wouldn't necessarily say just for young politicians, but I think for that you have to like look back a little bit in time and geographically, because there is something that since 2012 in Europe has been called pacification. So all of the social democratic parties have lost voters in like high numbers. And at the same time, the far right was gaining more and more voters. And so for a long time, the media has actually spreading the story that the social democratic parties and the labor parties have lost voters to the far right. And it was particularly the working class who ran away. But if you actually do look into the data of the European election studies, and we do have a lot of data on that, you see that the young voters and the highly educated ran away to the Green parties. They think like Green is the new red, or is the better left party, whereas the far right actually gained its voters from the non-voter bloc and the conservative parties. But these phenomena happening at the same time and is looking like a scissor in a graph. A lot of people thought these phenomena were related. Not so much the case. So why did the young voters run away to the Green parties? Because they embrace climate change and politics, sustainability, education that matters for them, making education for free in a lot of countries, and LGBTQ plus rights a lot earlier than and more like believable than the social democratic parties did, who were late adopters of these things. And so meanwhile, the best predictor for voting for the center left in Europe is age, which means that these parties are dying like a dinosaur. And so I would actually recommend to left parties around the world, if they want to win back like young, highly educated voters, to embrace those left progressive policies more, and not what parts of the European media has been suggesting to them for a long time, anti-immigration policies and a left nationalism, because that will drive those young voters even further away from them. And so actually it would be advisable, and they could take a page from that playbook. And probably, embrace that trend. I think actually in New Zealand, this might have just been a little bit delayed, what we have been seeing with social democratic parties in Western Europe, so that they have not been part of that global decline yet, because it has been brushed over a little bit like with an attractive young author like Jacinda Ardern. And so, but also the Labour Party here would be advised to go more for those progressive policies, I would say. However, the US is still a highly polarized country. And so progressiveness, at least of, I think, on the national level, must be prescribed to them in like pretty careful doses, or just sprinkled into a democratic campaign. So because getting a Mamdani like president elected is probably still too too much of a move for this country, but I could imagine a moderate presidential candidate with a more progressive, younger VC choice, maybe. So, or at least having people like Mamdani or Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez play a bigger role in the Democratic Party in the future. I think this would resonate a lot with the Gen Z voters, in particular, more and more of them becoming like voting age.
A self-proclaimed socialist just won the race for New York City mayor. We hit the streets to see how New Yorkers are reacting.
I was disappointed. He says a lot. He's charismatic, but so was Castro.
I was reluctantly thankful because he was just the best out of three that didn't quite work out. I do fear for the future of the Democratic Party if this is a brand of liberalism that sticks.
My initial thought, it's embarrassing for 34 years old to run probably the most successful city in the world. It's a disgrace for a city that was built by Jewish immigrants and made it to be the greatest city in the world.
It's funny because as I was walking, I kind of like to take in the energy of the city, especially after such a big night. I feel like there's a calm energy now, so I think there's hope.
And many people are saying this is a major shift in politics in the city. Do you feel that change today? And if so, what fears or hopes do you have?
First day out, calling out Donald Trump. He doesn't know who he's getting in the ring with. As Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So we'll see. I don't think he's going to be able to change much.
I'm a little skeptical about how he's going to get everything done. I think that's what a lot of people are.
I fear that the Democratic Party will keep losing working class voters. It makes me more cautious.
I lived in New York most of my life, and it's a very weird future I'm going to see. He says he's going to give free buses. Who pays for that? I do. Businesses pay for that. Helps nobody. You know, the policies he's giving is not beneficial for the city.
And especially as well, you mentioned before social media, and of course I saw everything. I wasn't even looking for the Mamdani social media channels, and I found them upon my I think it was Hot Girls for Mamdani. Then you had the Africans for Mamdani, Muslims for Mamdani, all in this really bright coloured green. I mean, no, it wasn't green. It was orange and blue, beautifully displayed. I mean, it was just it. There must be parties around the world studying those Instagram feeds and those TikTok feeds and seeing what they did, because it did speak to current generations and people entering the voter base, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely. So I think his social media campaign played a huge role in his success. Social media campaigns become more and more important around the world anyway. But I think he was successful for basically like three reasons. So first of all, he linked very well his online content to his offline campaign. So he talked, for example, to ordinary people on the streets why they voted for Trump and presented his agenda to them. And then he put it on TikTok. And so offline and online were very well connected. The second thing, it was believable. So he was using social media naturally, so as people of his generation do. So with older politicians, it has been very cringe in the past. So think of Joe Biden joining with like in his late 70s Snapchat, and he got ridiculed by Gen Z voters for that. So authenticity matters a lot on social media. And this is also why influencers have such like huge followingships. So, for example, Trump is also successful with his audience because he is authentic. So even his typos in his social media posts are authentic. And I think the third reason why his social media campaign was so successful is probably he embraced this everyday celebrity politician style, as it's called in political communication research. So this is like more trying to make yourself relatable and very much including influencer style elements in your campaign. This is in stark contrast to the super celebrity politician of the past that we have been seeing in the past, which is more a traditional personalization strategy and portrays politicians more as like extraordinary charismatic leaders. So most politicians these days already mix both strategies. We have seen this from Christopher Luxon in the 2023 campaign, who tried to balance that out and presented this traditional super celebrity celebrity politician more on Facebook, where you have an older audience. And the everyday celebrity politicians, he saved for his TikToks with a younger audience. So I think in like the social media age of campaigning, you will see this more and more from politicians. And Mamdani is probably surely one of those who's like at the forefront of this. I would think that is actually like a really good point, that campaign managers do usually watch trends all over the world. And so campaign contexts differ between countries, of course, and you cannot always fully copy campaigns because you cannot transplant them into different campaign contexts, because that would be incompatible. But they surely shop, and we have seen this in all campaigns all around the world from successful examples around the world, and they really study them, and they even go there for exchanges. So also Marine Le Pen's campaign visited Trump's campaigners, and they have been sitting together in the Trump Tower. There are pictures of that kind of stuff. So in particular, between like parties of the same ideology, we see them like exchanging campaign knowledge.
And I even think with that, and I know that I'm obsessed with the social media campaign, but even the font that they chose is very, I suppose, trendy right now, right? Like, and the color and the boldness of the colors, and even the campaign imagery. Half of them that I saw, it looked like they had been taken on a 2000s digital camera. That is very trendy right now, even down to the very, the placement of things is very. So I think that it's more than I've noticed it more than I ever have before, I think, with the Mamdani one. And that's why I was so interested and taken aback with it.
Yeah, even the corporate design, it was all perfect until the last bit. And you could really see like this was a young group of campaigners handling that, knowing what they are doing in the social media age, because it always becomes cringe when you put the old campaign manager on that. Rather have the intern who's 20-something and a college kid run the social media campaign these days. Yeah,
100%, because all the money in the world, and this is something else that I've been wanting to talk about as well, the Bezoses. They've just announced that they are funding the Met Gala, and I think it's just such all the money in the world cannot buy you class or cool, which I think is something that's completely another topic for another day. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us, Mona.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.